I want to ask you, what is the aspect of this pandemic that has you most worried about our society? Jen?
I think loneliness is a big factor. It's just not safe to interact with our friends and family or even the checkout clerk at the grocery store. Loneliness is a huge influence on our health. It's more dangerous than smoking. I think that's a major concern.
So, yes, Jen, that's true. So, research has found that it's kind of astonishing, but loneliness is just as predictive of morbidity and mortality. Morbidity meaning that you can have multiple negative health outcomes at the same time, and that it's actually the same, just as impactful as things as like smoking or not exercising very much, if not more so impactful on our health. So,
Wow.
it's pretty yeah, and there's, like, some really good, data to support that, which is pretty astonishing, I think, because we think of things like smoking as a huge risk factor, right? And so something that's, like, social perception related, like loneliness, that refers to more of the perception of the quality of our social relationships being more powerful than something like cigarette smoking is pretty, I think, convincing for to kind of vouch for a lot of the stuff that we're talking about today.
Right, right. Um, so yeah, Miley.
And that kind of goes back to the whole point in terms of ecological or biological needs. I mean, we as humans are very hardwired for connection. And so I feel like just being not able to connect with people. And I think, as a person who studies social media, we think that we can get our personal connections through electronics devices like texting or social media use or what have you. But really, the literature has shown that it really is not as effective as face-to-face interactions. We just don't get that endorphin rush that we normally would in a Zoom type of context or
Yeah.
electronic meetings or what have you. It's just not the same.
I was going to ask about that because I've seen a lot and I have myself joined a lot of like virtual happy hours or like Zoom calls where your friends get together and everything. So, do you think that that is just not satisfying the togetherness need in the same way that as if we can all get together physically?
I think that you get a sort of endorphin rush from meeting face to face versus, I mean, I do think that you have some sort of connection when you are, you know, communicating online or via Zoom or any kind of electronic way that you communicate. But I just don't think there's any substitute for face-to-face interaction. And I think it comes down to really core base needs. Like we are very hardwired for connection. And I think, because we really depended on each other for, it's that whole like evolutionary psych
Mhm.
stuff where we really depended on each other in order to survive. And
Mhm.
so, I mean, if you think about it, like social isolation, um, that's the worst kind of punishment that you can give prisoners and so forth. Take
Right.
away all kind of human connection. So I just don't think it really fulfills our needs in the same way. I know
Yeah.
for myself, like even though I see all of you all on a regular basis, like in terms of Zoom meetings and so forth, it's still not the same as actually being in person. And then you don't get the same nuances that you normally would in face-to-face interactions. Just that nonverbal communication just doesn't translate as well. All of the other, uh, you know, touch, feel, all that kind of
Yeah, I
thing
was
just
I was
doesn't.
gonna say something about the opportunity for touch or like physical closeness too, which I was thinking about because what Miley is getting at with like the endorphin rush, like we actually have we our reward system, both in our brain and in terms of like our actual like our opioid receptors are actually active when we're having meaningful social connections with people. And I don't actually know if there's been anything in the area of like opioid receptor activation, like comparing online versus in person. But I would imagine based on like the literature about rewards and expectation of rewards, and ability to kind of fulfill our reward-based systems that are really hardwired with that fundamental need to belong that Miley was talking about, that we would certainly have much more of an opportunity to get that direct reward. If I was in person with you guys now, I could show you that I was interested by moving closer. I could potentially touch you on the arm or just kind of be nearer to you to show my interest. And there's something very rewarding about that we can't have over, in 2D like this. As great as it is that we have it as something, it's still not the same.
Yeah, it is good that we have it. I mean, because just because it's not as good as face to face does not mean that it's not good. I mean,
So
obviously, this
grateful.
is what's what's getting us some of us through. I have noticed just personally in my own interactions when we have video calls and stuff, it does feel a little bit more awkward. And like it's harder to have a conversation. I think maybe we miss some of the cues about who's going to talk next, and so we kind of we have some trouble getting the natural rhythm. I also kind of feel sometimes that we don't have as much to talk about, probably because we're not doing things as much. It's like, hey, what did you do last
Yeah.
night? "Oh, the same thing I did, the night before and everything. But I also wonder sometimes if it's because it feels like the things we have to share aren't as impactful as or they don't mean as much in the face of a pandemic. Like something really good
Yeah.
happens to you, but it feels very small compared to what's happening in the world, and so it's harder to share and be happy about those things.
Sure. Yeah, it's complicated. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can I also add about social comparison while you're talking about that?
Mm.
Yeah.
So we have an episode about social comparison coming, so just wait. But social comparison theory was developed by Leon Festinger, and it's this general idea that to know how good we are at something, we're constantly comparing ourselves to other people. So I think that's kind of tying in some of what we're talking about with social media, with meeting our needs, and with things not feeling as important or impactful anymore. So when you're scrolling through social media and seeing all of those amazing people who are saying, my quarantine day looks like this, right? I get up and I work out, I run 5 miles, and then I bake banana bread, and then I do this elaborate dinner, and I do all of my goals, and I've taken my dogs on 5 walks, and I've done all these things, and I've created this quilt, and you start to feel really bad about yourself, right?
When you're like,
You're like, I sat on the couch and watched Golden Girls and ate ice cream and cried. So I'm not quite doing as well, right? So I think it's social comparison of how people are coping, which is interesting because we don't usually see something that's such a national problem. And it feels as though these people on social media who are doing so well, when I'm seeing that, I'm thinking, why am I not doing enough? Right. So at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a lot of noise on Twitter among academics in particular about how we'll have so much time and write so many papers and be so productive. And I read that and I just got this feeling in the pit of my stomach like, I don't think that's going to be me.
Right.
Is that what the expectation is? I'm supposed to do more with less, right? So the pressure that you can feel and artificially put on yourself based on what you think everyone else is doing to cope, and that may not actually be working for you.
Right.
the King Lear phenomenon, that thing that went around on like every social media thing where it was like when Shakespeare was
Yeah.
quarantined, he wrote King Lear. And it's like, oh, okay, good for Shakespeare. He probably didn't have 75 student emails every day that he had to respond to, right?
Yeah, and all these devices dinging.
Yeah.
Also, he was one person, right? That's a case study, N of one. Very
Allegedly.
small sample size.
Allegedly.
Yeah. Seriously. And what was
Yeah.
I was gonna say, what was his wife doing? I don't know. Was Shakespeare married? We're getting out of my depth here.